Hello and welcome, friends. Today, after having discussed the public sector, the private sector in India, as well as the cooperative sector, the time for us is to discuss the small scale sector here in India. This is the last topic in this particular unit, and having known about the public and the private as well as the cooperative sector, if you get some information on the small scale sector also, this will give you a comprehensive overview of how the Indian economy operates. So should we start? See, as you can see here in this particular picture, you may be seeing a particular mechanic. In fact, there are two mechanics working in a particular workshop. So this is a small scale sector enterprise or a small scale industry. So just to understand what small scale sector is, manufacture or render services on a small scale. So these are those enterprises which are involved in production of some kind, manufacturing of some kind. They might also be rendering some service, but all that would be done on a very small scale, which would mean that they would be having limited number of customers. Their reach would also be very limited. The setup would also not be very large. The infrastructure would not be very large, and naturally the investment would also be small. As I've said already, they use less manpower, so generally the number of people working is very small, and the machines which are being used are also very small. They are not the cutting edge technology kind of machines and technology. They are relatively small machines and being operated by a small number of people. Generally such enterprises are there are exceptions of course, but generally they are run as sole proprietorship, or they are run in form of a partnership. They run as a partnership. Sole proprietorship means there is one individual who is owning the whole business, which could be the case with a bakery shop in your neighborhood. And a partnership is when 2 or 3 people or maybe 4 or 5 people have got together to set up a business, and that would be running the enterprise in partnership. So generally you find that they are run as sole proprietorship or as partnerships. Then one thing very peculiar about small scale sector is that in the small scale sector, ownership and management is the same, which means the example I took of a neighborhood bakery shop, you would find that in that particular bakery shop, the person who is the owner, who has invested his money and who has the ownership of that particular business, is also managing the business. If you compare it with what happens in the large scale enterprises, for example, if you compare it with, let's say, an enterprise like we can name so many different enterprises are there. For example, if you talk about Bajaj, some of the ownership is with the common people and the remaining is with the family, and there are some institutional investors also. However, these people are not involved, most of these people are not involved in running and managing the business. They are not involved in the management of the business. Management is being done by somebody who is an expert in management. So they have, these kind of large scale businesses have basically hired people who are expert, who are management professionals, who are management experts. And that is something that is just not happening with the small scale sector. In the small scale sector, the person who has invested the money will also be managing the business. So the owner and the manager would be the same, or we can say that ownership and the management resides in the same person. Generally these small scale industries are also labor intensive, since they use outdated technology, and there are exceptions which are using the best and the most cutting edge of the technologies, but then I am talking about the general rule, and generally they are labor intensive. Why? Because they are using old technology. They do not have access to new technology, and for them it is easier and far less expensive to employ workers than to invest in the best of the machinery and the best of the technology. So they are generally more labor intensive, which means for the same amount of output you would find that more workers would be employed in a small scale industry if you compare it with a large scale industry. So they are more labor intensive, and that is their importance for the Indian economy also. We'll discuss this point later on. Then, as I said, the reach is also limited. They are hardly catering to a few markets. They might be catering to only the district in which they have been set up, or they might be catering to only a few number of customers. So that is one issue with the small scale sector enterprises. In fact, they do not have the scale to cater to a larger customer base also. So that is again one reason which limits their expansion, and they are happy and satisfied with just catering to a few customers. The examples, as I said, the neighborhood bakery shop, the beauty parlor, the photography shop that you find in your market, the car repair mechanic, the food processing industry. There are people who are involved in making papad out of various vegetables and making pickles and jam. So doing all that at small level is basically the small scale enterprise. This is fine. Now let us talk about one very important aspect, which is that since the small scale sector is very important for India, we will be discussing the role of small scale sector very soon. And the government wants, and the policymakers want the small scale sector to work really effectively and to be able to survive, not only be able to survive but to prosper as well. And that is why what has been done is that it has been accorded the status of priority sector. I hope you remember our earlier discussion about priority sectors. Priority sectors are important for the economy of a country, and so some of the sectors are earmarked as priority sector in India, and agriculture and allied activities, they are one of the priority sectors that we have. Then we also have small scale sector as one of the priority sector, and once a particular sector is earmarked, is given the status of priority sector, what happens is the banks have to, it is mandatory for the banks to allocate a particular percentage of their loans to the entities in this particular sector. In India, for example, the priority sector should be lent around 40% of the overall loans by the banks, which means that if a bank is, let's say, lending rupees 100 in a particular financial year, then 40% of that amount, at least 40 rupees, should be allocated to the priority sector. So naturally, if a particular sector is allocated this status, the flow of credit to this sector improves, and this kick starts a cycle of growth, because more credit means more number of small scale enterprises can be set up. They can invest in expanding, they can invest in improving their technologies and processes, and they can prosper. That is why small scale sector enterprises, which have been given the status of priority sector here in India, they have been able to access bank credit much easily than would have been the case had they not been accorded this particular status. And why the government and the policymakers are doing this much for the small scale sector, we'll understand in a little while from now, when we'll be discussing the role and importance of small scale sector in the Indian economy. Now let us talk about small scale industries specifically in India, and we'll find that basically these small scale industries are categorized into three broad classes. The micro, you can have a look at the top right corner of the screen, and you will see that they are being categorized into micro, small and medium enterprises, which is basically the reason why this particular sector is also known as micro, small, medium enterprise sector, MSME sector. Is this okay? Micro, small and medium enterprises. So in India, small scale industries are categorized into these three broad classes. And have a look at this fact that in manufacturing sector, in this classification, you have a look at the first line. It has been mentioned, old categorization on the basis of investment. Now this is one categorization which might soon be replaced by a slightly different kind of categorization. We'll be discussing that also in a little while from now. So this is, as of now, this is the categorization which is in practice, and this categorization is on the basis of investment in the plant and machinery. So that is the value of total investment in plant and machinery, and on that basis we have categorized the small scale industries in India. Now if you look at the manufacturing sector, you will find that if the investment is only up to rupees 25 lakhs, then that particular enterprise would qualify as a micro enterprise. Naturally, if the investment is above 25 lakhs but it should be below 5 crores, remember this, then it would be a small scale enterprise. A small enterprise within small scale sectors, we have three categories: micro, small and medium. So it would be a small enterprise. And if the manufacturing, if the investment is more than 5 crores and up to rupees 10 crores, then it would be called a medium scale enterprise. This is okay. And naturally you understand, if the investment is beyond 10 crores, then it would be a large scale enterprise. So we are not discussing that because we are only dealing with small scale industries as of now. Now if you look at the corresponding values for the service sector, you'll find for micro enterprises the value of investment should not be above 10 lakhs. So if it is less than 10 lakh, it is micro enterprise. If it is 10 lakhs to 2 crore, then it is small, and if it is in this particular range 2 to 5 crore, then it is medium. So this is how we categorize the various SSIs that we have in manufacturing sector and the service sector. Now one question that you might want to ask is, why this different treatment to the manufacturing sector and the service sector? There's got to be some reason for this different treatment. You see, basically you see here that in the manufacturing sector the investment limits are much more than in the service sector across all the three categories. Here it is up to 25 lakh, but in service only up to 10 lakh. The reason is, in manufacturing sector generally there is a lot of investment in land, machinery and a plant. So naturally the level of investment is more in manufacturing sector enterprises. On the other hand, service sector enterprises can be run from even a single room. So for example, if I have started online classes, I can teach my classes online from my room only, and I don't teach much investment in equipment and infrastructure. Only a little bit of investment will do for me. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is, in manufacturing sector the expenditure is much more, it requires much more investment, and that is why the limits which have been provided for as far as manufacturing sector is concerned, they are higher than the limits provided for in the service sector. That is the reason. Is this okay? So that is why you always find that in the manufacturing sector the limits are much higher than in the service sector for all the three categories. Now as far as this particular categorization was concerned, now let's have a look at how actually the small scale industries were categorized into these three different classes. It is basically based on the self declaration of the owner or of the management of the enterprise. They declare as to how much they have invested in plant and machinery, and based on that the enterprise would be categorized as a micro or a small or a medium enterprise. However, the authorities, if they so wish, may want to verify whether the declaration made by the owner or the manager is true or not, and this verification process is a little costly. It requires quite some amount of field visits by the authorities, and it is again a time consuming process also, and there are chances of corruption as well. So that is why this particular verification process is a little costly, and this is the reason why government is now planning to come up with a new kind of a categorization. So new categorization has been proposed. Now I am discussing this particular new categorization. Now please understand, this has only been proposed 2018. It was proposed for the first time, and it has been approved by the cabinet, but until and unless it gets a nod from the parliament, it cannot be implemented. So the process is on, and hopefully in another 1 or 2 years you would find that the new categorization has replaced the older one. So the new categorization is basically on the basis of annual turnover. And the categorization is like this. For micro enterprises, be it the manufacturing or the service sector, if the annual turnover is less than rupees 5 crore, it would be categorized as a micro enterprise. Between 5 to 75 crore, it is going to be categorized as small, and above 75 till 250 crore, it would be a medium scale enterprise. Beyond 250 is a large scale enterprise. Now, we need to understand one more thing as to why government is planning to switch to this new kind of a categorization. See, the reason are very simple. First is that this aspect, whether the turnover is 5 crore or 10 crore or 75 crore, this can be easily assessed from the GST network depending on how much tax is being paid by the particular entity and how much credit is being claimed by the entity. They have to file, every entity has to file a GST return, and based on that return we can easily find out the annual turnover. And then if we start doing this, there would be no scope for any ambiguity or any kind of a discretion, and there would be complete transparency in the process, and the categorization would be crystal clear to every single entity. And that is why we are planning to switch to this new kind of a categorization. No inspection would be required because the categorization is being done on the basis of returns filed by the entities. So the businesses would be filing the return based on what we will be assessing. Based on those returns, GST returns, will be able to assess what is their turnover, and based on that they would be allocated to a particular category. So is this understood? And then there would be complete transparency. But then one question might come to your mind is why the entities are interested in being classified as a micro or a small or medium enterprise. See, I'll give you a rough example, a very crude example. If there is a medium scale enterprise, supposing there is a medium scale enterprise, I'm taking up this example, and we are, let us now, for the time being, we are sticking to the old process, old method of categorization. So naturally, medium scale enterprise, and in the manufacturing sector, if the investment is less than 10 crores, it would be qualified as medium scale enterprise. But the moment this investment goes beyond 10, let's say it becomes 11 crores, what will happen? This particular enterprise will be categorized now as a large scale enterprise, and it might go on to lose all the incentives provided by the government to small scale industries. And certainly they would not want to do that. So what will they do? They will fudge their accounts, and they will probably make a false declaration deliberately. And the same is the case with the other categories also. If a particular enterprise, it says a micro enterprise, let's say it is claiming that it is a micro enterprise, and somehow it is found to be actually a small enterprise because it is found out that the investment in the plant and machinery is more than 25 lakhs, then what will happen? They might lose the incentives which are generally given to the micro scale enterprises or the micro enterprises. So that is why companies want to be, various entities want to be categorized as a small scale industry, and within the small scale industry categorization also they would want to be categorized as micro or small, and not as a medium scale enterprise, because being a micro enterprise will bring them more incentives from the government side. Now let us discuss the role and importance of small scale sector in Indian economy. First is that they contribute almost 55% to our industrial production. Now this figure can be a little bit here and there because it will keep on changing from one particular financial year to the other, but then you should keep in your mind that the contribution to GDP will be somewhere around 55% of industrial production. So this is the kind of production that this is the kind of output that they are generating in the economy. So naturally they are contributing to the GDP. Again, we have talked about small scale enterprises being very labor intensive, and that is why the number of people that they would employ would be far more than a large scale enterprise which is performing at the same level, at the comparable level. So if two enterprises, one is from large scale enterprise and other one is from the small scale, the large scale enterprise is using technology and they're less dependent on workers, so naturally they would be less labor intensive, which means they would be generating much less employment than a small scale enterprise. And that is why I had been telling you that we'll be discussing this particular point. The small scale sector is very, very important for the Indian economy. Again, as far as the small scale sector enterprises are concerned, they are not concentrated in a particular area. They are not concentrated in a metropolitan area, which is the case with many of the large scale industries, or in a particular industrial area. They are found across the country. Beauty parlors, shops, mechanics, and all these kind of enterprises, they are evenly spread across the country, which means that firstly, in case they are involved in some kind of value addition, in kind of some kind of processing, they would be sourcing the raw material from the local areas, which means in all parts of the country, the raw material which is available with the primary sector, that would find ready markets in these small scale sector enterprises which are being set up or which are functioning in the vicinity. So this is one major role that is played by the small scale sector. In this manner, the small scale sector also gives an avenue for the farming community to increase their incomes by selling to these small scale enterprises, because these small scale enterprises require the farm products as their raw material. Capital mobilization, another major role which is played by small scale enterprise. Let's take an example of maybe a student who could not get a job, and so he thought that he should let's say he should start a bakery. So he starts the bakery, and to set up the bakery he required, let's say, 1 lakh rupees as initial investment. He has only 20,000. So what will he do? He'll ask his relatives or neighbors for the remaining 80,000, and then the whole money will be invested in the business. Basically what has happened is that rupees 20,000 which was with him and rupees 80,000 which was with his neighbors and friends and which was sitting idle somewhere, now it has started getting circulated in the economy. So that money which was sitting idle somewhere, now it is being invested in some kind of an enterprise, and it is now going to generate more money. So this way small scale sector is able to mobilize capital also, and generally this capital is otherwise kept idle. This is the capital which is generally idle. So that idle capital is being mobilized, and that is a very, very important contribution of the small scale sector in India. Then again, small scale sector helps in development of local entrepreneurship at the local level. We have been saying that government just cannot provide you the number of jobs that you want. The government can only provide limited number of jobs. The same is the case with private firms also. So the next avenue where jobs growth can be seen is the small scale sector. Why? Because small scale sector, when these enterprises are set up, at times they employ people. So small scale sector is not only providing employment that we've already discussed, but it is developing entrepreneurs at the local level. So naturally, if entrepreneurs are being developed at the local level, there would be less demand for jobs from the private sector or the public sector. In that sense, it will reduce the pressure of unemployed people on the economy, because now these people, many of them, they have set up their own small scale enterprises. So the small scale sector also plays an important role in developing local entrepreneurship. So think of the BBA student who has started his own bakery, or think of the guy who after completing his 10th started his own workshop for car repair. So this is how small scale sector has been developing entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs at the local level. Again, equitable distribution of wealth also happens in small scale enterprises, specifically in those small scale enterprises which are basically set up in partnership. So let us say 5 young people come together and they set up an enterprise, invest their money, pool in their money and invest and then set up their own enterprise. So this is what basically is a partnership firm. You would find that whatever profit is earned by that particular firm will be distributed equitably among the people, among the owners, among the joint owners. So naturally there would be equitable distribution of wealth, and it basically is an avenue for income generation for those people who otherwise do not have a very good source of income. So they do not have a public employment, they are not working with any government, they are not government employees, they are not working with any private sector firm also, and that is why they set up their own small scale enterprise. So basically, once they set up their small scale enterprise and they start earning, this will reduce the inequity between those who are working as a government or as a private employee and those who are not working with a government or a private firm, and rather they have their own business, a small scale business. So this will reduce the income gap between these two different segments of the society, and there would be overall more equity in the overall society. Small scale sector also helps stimulate growth of ancillary firms. For example, let us take example of a bakery. So if you've set up your own bakery, naturally you would require some kind of packaging material also, because you need to package your products and then send it to the customer's place. The customer comes to your shop, then naturally you'll have to provide in the packaging as well. So naturally you would require some packaging material also. You would require maybe some dairy products also with which you can prepare your product. So you might require milk. So don't you think this will also lead to development of ancillary firms or development of feeder firms? So there would be a shop, there would be some business producing packaging material, and they would supply their packaging material to you. There would be some other businesses, some other dairy businesses running, which would be providing their products to you. So not only this particular bakery has been able to generate income, but it has also led to more income generation by ancillary industries like the packaging material firm, by the business that was producing the packaging material, or by the dairy firm which was there. So in that sense they are also helping out the other ancillary firms in their vicinity. They are also able to stimulate growth in these ancillary firms in the vicinity. Then again, since people are getting job in small scale sector around or near their place of residence, naturally the rate of rural to urban migration would be much less. Now this is a big issue, the rural to urban migration, and you would have seen that after the lockdown was announced, so many people who had migrated to urban areas, they are now returning to their villages and to their homes in remote areas, in far off states. So this can give you an idea as to what kind of migration takes place here in India for purpose of in search of jobs. So there is a lot of migration, and if a small scale sector which are evenly spread out across the country, they start generating employment, and they do generate employment at the local level, so naturally there would be a lot of decline in migration of people from the rural and semi-urban areas to the urban and metropolitan areas. This will also reduce the pressure on the administration of the urban areas, on the civic amenities which are provided to people in the urban areas, and this would overall make the life of the people who are migrating, who otherwise used to migrate, much more easier, because now they are close to their families. So in that sense also it would be beneficial to people who are able to bag a job in these small scale enterprises near their place of residence. Then again, since these small scale enterprises are evenly spread out across the country and they have been generating income across the country, they are also leading to balanced regional development. Since they are widely dispersed across the country, this is not the case with large scale enterprises. If you look at large scale enterprise, you would not find any large scale enterprises in the hilly regions of Uttarakhand, for example. But then if you talk about the small scale enterprises, you would find that there are quite a number of small scale enterprises here also. So while the large scale enterprises are concentrated in a few pockets, maybe in the industrial areas or the metropolitan areas, and that is why they bring about development in only those areas. The small scale industries, which are generally spread across the country, they are widely dispersed across the country, they are able to bring about development in all the areas across the country, and that will correct the imbalance in development, regional imbalance in development, and all areas, all the regions in the country would develop almost at the same pace. Again, one more contribution of the small scale sector in India is that it contributes almost 40% to our export earnings. So it is a major forex earner, foreign exchange earner for us. 40% of our exports, value wise, they are produced by small scale sector enterprises. So it's not as if small scale sector enterprises, they only produce products of inferior quality. In fact, many of them are producing items which are of superior quality, and they can compete with the other similar kind of products across the world, and that is why they've been able to earn 40% of revenues that we earn from our exports. So 40% of exports from India basically originate from small scale sector enterprises, which is a big figure, and thus they also help the Indian economy on foreign exchange. Now let us talk about the problems with the small scale sectors, the various issues which are there, which are creating obstacles in their path and which are not allowing them to grow up to their potential. So one major issue is the shortage of credit. The credit is very difficult to access. This is a big problem with small scale sector enterprises in India, and that is why government is continuously, if you look at the trend last 10-20 years, you would find almost every 1 or 2 years government comes up with one scheme or the other to ease up the flow of credit to small scale sector industries in India. Still there's a lot of problem with accessibility. Many of the small scale sector enterprises, they are not considered credit worthy, and they are not provided any loans by the banks, and there are again issues of accessibility also. Many a times documentation is a problem with small scale enterprises, and overall result is that many a times they do not get the kind of financial assistance that they need. They do not get the kind of credit they require to run their and to set up their enterprise. Then one more issue is the raw material. Many times, specifically for those enterprises, those small scale enterprises which are exporting to foreign destinations, they are simply not able to source raw materials, because many a times the raw material that they are using might itself be getting imported from some foreign countries. So in such cases there is always a perennial scarcity of such imported raw material, so they are not able to source good quality raw material, and then many times the raw material that is available to them is of very low quality, which ultimately leads to inferior quality of their output, which ultimately leads to the customers not being very satisfied with their product, with their output, which ultimately hinders the growth of these kind of small scale enterprises. Then many times, though the raw material is available, but it is of the required quality is available, but then it is not available at the time at which it is required. So it may so happen that an industry, that a small scale enterprise needs the raw material today, but it is made available to them only 7 days from now. So that is one major problem with small scale enterprises. So many a times this causes additional problems. What kind of problem? Underutilization of resources. So for example, coming back to the same example, let us say I need the raw materials today. I'm running a small scale enterprise, but my supplier tells me that he would only be able to deliver the raw material the next week, only after 7 days. So what will I do during this particular period? I cannot source from some other supplier also, because these kind of contracts and these kind of negotiations take time. So I'll have to wait for 7 days until my supplier delivers the raw material to me. But then what will I do for these 7 days? I'll reduce my pace of production. I'll have to keep some of my machines idle. Some of my workers would also remain idle because there is no raw material for them to work on. and this would basically be underutilization of resources that I have. My resources would remain idle, and this again is a big problem, because though I will have to pay for these resources, I'll have to pay my worker his monthly salary, I'll have to pay for the machine for its maintenance, I'll have to pay the power bill, but I'm not able to generate revenue in this period of time because the work is not getting done, simply because I do not have any raw material. So my expenditures are increasing while I'm not generating any income in this 7 days period. So naturally this would be a big problem for me, and it would make me unviable. Again, unreliable power supply is one major issue. In fact, some of the small scale industries which have been set up in Sitarganj, they once went to the management of the industrial area and asking for a guaranteed 24/7 power supply. Why? Because if the power supply is not reliable, it is not 24/7, it is not provided to them throughout the day, then naturally they will have to stop production for the time when the power supply is not there, and naturally this would again make their, in short, this would again cause their machines to remain idle and their manpower to remain idle, again which is a big cost for them. So unreliable power supply is a major problem with small scale sector here in India. Then again, another issue is limited investment. Naturally they do not have a lot of credit assistance from the banks. They also are not earning a lot because of the issues that we have just discussed. So they do not have retained earnings to invest in new technology or better kind of machines, and that is why ultimately what happens is their product quality, their output quality remains inferior, and they're not able to many a times match up with the competitors from other parts of the world. Naturally, since they do not have much money to invest, they are not going to spend on R&D also, research and development. So what happens is the technology remains outdated, they are not researching any new product, they are not developing any new product or technology using the outdated technology. So what happens is the product quality is inferior to other products come across the world from other parts of the world. Not only this, the quality is variable. What does this mean? Some of the output is of really good quality, the other output is not of that good a quality, and the production cost would also be higher since the technology which is being used is relatively older, outdated one, obsolete one. So naturally their production cost would be higher, there would be more number of defects, the quality, as I said, will be variable also. So these issues will emerge because of limited investment. Again, they would also not be having a good MIS, management information system. They would not be able to collect data from different points in their organization, and they would not be able to cull out some information from this data to understand the problems that the enterprise is facing, to understand what all issues are there in the enterprise, to make use of this information to improve the functioning of their enterprise or to improve the efficiency of their enterprise. So they would simply not be having this kind of an MIS system, information system, and the lack of information system will lead them to make poor decisions. On the other hand, if you compare them with large scale enterprises, these have wonderful information system. For example, if you talk about, just to give you an example, if you talk about a company like Facebook and Google, they have wonderful information systems. They can understand what the customers are doing online and how they are browsing, what all sites they are browsing and what are their browsing habits, and based on that they can prepare a full profile of the customer. So this is the kind of quality that their information systems have. On the other hand, our small scale enterprises, be it in the service sector, be it in the manufacturing sector, they cannot make use of their data to generate some information, to generate some insight, because they simply do not have the money to invest in implementing a management information system, because of which the decision making would be very, very poor, which will ultimately prevent the small scale enterprise from benefiting from the market opportunities and from increasing their revenue earnings. Again, dearth of skilled manpower, this is one major issue. This was an issue with the cooperative sector also, this is an issue with the small scale sector also. There is not sufficient skilled manpower available to them many a times, because again they cannot invest a lot, so they cannot hire the best of the professionals. They cannot hire the best of the accountants or engineers to run their production plant. They cannot hire the best of managerial personnel or the best of marketing personnel to sell their products. So this is one more problem, because of which they are simply not able to realize their full potential. They do not have sufficient marketing know-how, nor can they employ experts from the marketing domain, simply because they cannot pay them too much. Again, this is one more issue which is causing many problems to the small scale sector in India. Generally, small scale sector it sells its products to larger firms, to large scale firms. Now, since in this kind of a transaction, small scale enterprises, they have a weaker position, they are on a weaker ground. The reason is large scale enterprise can switch to any other small scale supplier also. Again, the large scale enterprise is buying in bulk, so naturally they would be bargaining for bulk discount, and then they would be threatening the small scale supplier to switch to, they will be threatening the small scale supplier that they might switch to some other firm if the supplier does not give them the kind of products that these companies want, or offer them the prices that these companies want. So ultimately what happens in this kind of a relationship between a small scale and a large scale enterprises, the large scale enterprises are very in a very dominant position, and that is why they bargain really hard to obtain discounts from the small scale suppliers, and the small scale suppliers have to sell at unremunerative prices to the large scale industries which are their customers, because of which they are not able to generate sufficient revenues, sufficient earnings from their hard work, from their labor. And apart from that, not only this, many a times they are also forced to give very relaxed credit terms to these large scale firms. So the credit period may also be, repayment time may also be very long, which means the money, the sales is generally on, the selling is generally on credit. The sale made by the small scale enterprise would be on credit, while the payment would come long time after the products have been supplied to the large scale enterprises. So this again would mean that the small scale sector enterprise would have to go for some kind of a source of working capital, because naturally they have sold their product to the large scale enterprises. The payment is going to arrive only 2 months down the line, so naturally they will have to look for additional working capital, which again will make them unviable, because they would have to pay interest on that working capital loan also, which will ultimately reduce their earnings and reduce their profit margins. So all these problems persist as far as the small scale sector here in India is concerned. With this we have completed our discussion on the small scale enterprises also now, and now we have a broad and comprehensive idea about the various sectors in the Indian economy, including the public, private and cooperative sector, as well as the small scale sector today. So please go through the discussions that we have had in these sessions, and be ready for a test.